love my children and I love my wife. I thank the Lord each morning for this good old life. I've been blessed to make a living doing what I like, turning wrenches on a motorbike. And you know, I like things that go. I mean go, man, go. I like the speed and I dig that sound. Two-wheel horsepower getting to the ground. One thing for sure is I like to be around motorcycles. I love my wife's hugging and her kissing too. When she whispers in my ear, baby, I love you. But when she sees that look that comes across my face, all she says is be safe at the race, 'cause she knows I like things that go. I mean go, man, go. I like the speed and I dig that sound. Two-wheel horsepower getting to the ground. Ain't no doubt I just like to be around motorcycles.
I'm Chris Rivas, owner of the world's fastest bagger title at over 200 miles an hour, and working on the new turbo tramp. Well, I'm an owner of a business in California there, Chris Rivas V-Twin, and this is my daughter Cayla. She is the rider of probably, from what we know, the world's fastest Buell Blast. She made a one-way return of 127 miles an hour, and this is her third year setting records, and two different classes. So very glad to be here at Bonneville again this year, 2014. And my racing background really just comes all the way back, starting in the 1980s, the late 1980s. I started drag racing with my dad, who's been involved in drag racing for his whole life as well. And I got into Harley-Davidson motorcycles in the early 90s and bought my first Sportster and started doing some hot rod stuff to it. So I signed up for the series, went back a few weeks later and started racing the guys that were all out there on Suzukis. And with the Suzukis, they just completely dominated the track, and I didn't like that because it wasn't an American product. So I ended up finishing that year with doing modifications along the way to the Sportster, and I got track championship by the end of the year. The following 2 years in a row, I was the track champion on that bike. By the time we got to 2003, I ended up taking it through the whole AHDRA tour on the West Coast, and got the, they call it the Western World Champion. So on the West Coast, we were completely the champion, and was actually highly ranked for the national, even though we didn't go to any Eastern events. In 2004, we switched modes, and I built a new custom Pro Stock bike that we did with all the S&S parts, 160 cubic inch, 45 degree engine, and had pretty decent success with that. In 2004, had 2 runner-up positions. I ran all of 2005, 2006, and then joined forces with the world champion Matt Smith in 2006 and 7, and ran that bike with that team for that term, and had pretty marginal success. I actually made it to the final round once for a runner-up against the Harley team, and got to the semifinals a few times. And George Smith contacted me on the off season and asked if I wanted to ride their bike. Now, to me, the S&S G-Squared Motorsports factory team, as I called them, with George Smith at the helm, there is no better place to be in the racing world. We actually set low ET for the event, set the track record, and won the race. But it was just 5 points shy. And I called George in early 2009 and I said, well, I know we're not racing the Pro Stock team, but S&S roots are truly at the Salt Flats. So I'd like to do something, and what I've seen is there's a world's fastest bagger competition that's kind of unofficially been going on. The record is somewhere in the mid 140s. I know I can beat that on my first attempt out. And I just need a little bit of help from the S&S team. And they said, absolutely, whatever you need. So I flew back to Viola We did a lot of calculations and some 3D CAD drawings with the engineers, and built a 135 cubic inch engine with their new B2 heads that they sell, and put those on stock Harley-Davidson engine cases, and went out for the first run at SCTA, and they gave me a caution: on your first run, we don't care who you are, but 150 miles an hour is your absolute limit for your first run. And so the record was 146, I think, somewhere in that range. So I put a GPS right on over the stereo, duct taped it to the stereo, and I watched the GPS going through the time mile, 150, 151, 149, just kind of tried to keep it right there in that area. And when I pulled off the course, I had to have the starter sign off, and they had cautioned me not to go over 150. So my ticket said 150.6. So I was a little bit hesitant to bring it back to him, but I had to. And so he slapped my hand a little for going over the 150, but was happy to congratulate me that we just beat the record and qualified for a return run. So we took it back and went, I think, 154, and got the record in that class for sure. Switched classes, went 158 in the next class with some carburetor jetting, some tuning stuff that we got with George Smith over the phone. And I was happy just to get 2 records at Bonneville on my first attempt out, so we just put it back in the truck and went home with it. And then in 2010, we built what we knew was going to be eventually a 200 mile an hour bagger. So I said, this is what I can do with the stock chassis, stock engine cases. This is something we can do and actually drive on the street, which I am doing today. I ride that bike now back and forth to work. And so we built in 2010 the special bike. I didn't know as much about the geometry of a frame then as I do now. And I took it out in 2010. When I got to about 150 or 60 miles an hour, I got into a tank slap speed wobble, and it pitched me off at around 140 or 130. And I came to a stop, and I thought, this stopped being fun for just a minute. I think I even told my dad, I don't think I'll ever do this again. And, he said, yeah, let's just get the bike and go home. So we got home, and I looked at everything, and I did all my research, and of course talked to the guys at S&S and Warner Riley and George Smith, all the resources I could gather up, and found out that the geometry was all wrong in the front end. Rake and trail was all off. I fixed all that, came back in 2011, found the next weak link in the system, which was really thin pistons that I had custom made. We were burning holes in the pistons, but we're still able to go about 195 miles an hour with it. So in 2012, we had all of our little kinks worked out of the thing, and brought it back out here to the Salt, just raring to go. 2012, thought this was going to be it. Went out and made the first pass on it. It was a 204 pass, and I was just ecstatic. I had never been over 200 and didn't just tickle into it. We went 204. And so on the return run, we caught a little bit of a headwind and a crosswind and what have you, and went 198 something, I think, and still got the average to be 201.5. Brought it back to the, at the time it was the Bubs event here, the second meet with all motorcycles, and went 201.6 going and 201.8 coming back the other way for an average of 201.7. So we officially have, the only bagger that's ever seen 200 by quite a bit, and current record holder still. In that 2012 year, we found out in the AMA record book that a 12-year-old would be able to ride a motorcycle in competition. And I thought, well, I just happen to have a 12-year-old with me. So we built her a Buell Blast. The one stipulation is that 12-year-olds could only compete on a 250cc or less. 12 and 13, 250cc or less. So we took a Buell Blast and sleeved the cylinder down really small. Had a custom billet piston made by CP Pistons. and put Cayla on that bike there, and she went 65 miles an hour, I think it was, the first year, and set a record in that class. And then in 2013, she was our only record setter in our family. In 2013, she took the same bike out and went 68 miles an hour with it. So 2 years in a row she had records in that class. The stipulations in that book.
What did that feel like, getting out on the salt for the first time, Cayla?
I was kind of skeptical at first. Like, I wasn't sure really what to think because I really had no motorcycle riding experience before. And it felt like really smooth. Like, I wasn't sure how it would handle, but the run went like really well. And it was lots of fun, so.
Yeah, the crazy thing is a lot of people start their kids off on dirt bikes. You know, we see all kinds of people starting their kids off dirt bikes 4 years old. She had no experience to 12 years old at all on a motorcycle other than behind me. So at our shop in Fresno, Chris Rivas V-Twin, we have a dyno. So I thought that's a perfect place to teach somebody how to ride a motorcycle. We put the bike up on the dyno, put her up inside there, had her go through the gears and learn how to ride the bike on the dyno first, and then take it out on the street. She rode it around just a little bit around our shop. And I said, okay, looks like you're ready for Bonneville.
So are you hooked now, Cayla?
Yeah, I'm hooked. It's so much fun. After this year, it's like, I want to go faster.
So in 2014, she's 14 years old, and according to the AMA record rule book, it's 14-year-olds can now be on just about any size motorcycle. So we took the same bike, took the sleeves out of the cylinder, put a real 500 kit back in it, did all the motor work at our shop there, head porting and high compression piston and all that. And we got about 51 horsepower out of that little Buell Blast, which is pretty stout. And brought it back out here on the dyno. It seemed like it could go probably around 130s. Didn't know how that would transfer out here. You know, of course the conditions dictate everything. And she took it out for a down run of 111 miles an hour. And I found out in that time that she wasn't really giving it absolute full throttle. So we had our little pep talk in the trailer and went back for the record return run, and I said, okay, here's your chance. You got to really get after it. Get with that throttle real heavy and be able to feel where it stops at the very end. And she took off from the starting line, and wow, she had that thing flying. We couldn't believe how fast she took off and got through the gears really quick. They came over the radio and said she went 127 for the return run. And to our knowledge, there's never been a Buell Blast at 127 at 500 cc's on gasoline. Very, very outstanding. She's doing an incredible job. She's got a big future in racing. Yeah, it's just something that we are going to continue to be involved with. You know, this year we're doing this Dyna bike, and first year playing with turbos, so we thought we'd pay some honor to the S&S legacy and heritage that they have out here, and called it the Turbo Tramp. So the Turbo Tramp is definitely, you know, one of those things that I'm proud. Talked to Dan Kinsey about giving us permission to go do that and call it the Tramp, and George Smith was very excited about it. And it's big shoes to fill with that legacy behind me. We set a record yesterday at 186 with it, had a 192 return run, but I know it's got the potential on a very tight course to go probably in around the 230 range. We just need the course to tighten up, which is kind of what we're on hold here for now. And once it tightens up, if conditions are good, I think we've got some pretty big potential.
I'm a speed junkie, but it ain't my fault, 'cause you know I like things that go. I mean go, man, go. I like the speed and the dig that sound. 300 miles an hour across that salty ground. just my thing.